Welcome to KnotWork Storytelling. This is the show where we untangle our myths and reweave our stories, one age-old tale at a time. I'm your host and lead storyteller, Marisa Goudy. I'm a myth worker, a story healer, a coach for writers and creative entrepreneurs, and the author of The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. If you love what you hear and want to support the show, I'd be so grateful if you'd become a paid subscriber on Substack. In my newsletter, Myth is Medicine, you'll receive bonus content related to the stories on the show and deep dives into how mythology and folklore can help heal the individual and the collective in the present moment and beyond. There's a link in the show notes to follow Myth is Medicine on Substack, or visit mythismedicine.substack.com. Season 5, Episode 9, A Mother's Love, A Mother's Sacrifice, Tailtiu and Lugh. Before we dive into this week's story and conversation, I wanted to be sure you know about my summer offerings. On Thursday, August 1st, we'll gather for a 3-hour retreat called Harvest, an online Lughnasa retreat. Writers and creatives from around the world will gather for this event, and I hope that you'll join us. As you may know, Lughnasa is the first harvest of the Celtic year. There's a rich mythology connected with this celebration. During our time together, I'll tell you the story of the goddess Tailtiu. It's a story about service, sacrifice, and celebration. It's a deeply important story for anyone who is seeking to do deep creative work and share it with the world. We'll work with this myth and ask it to help us reflect on our year's creative journey to that point. And because it's only the first harvest and there's so much more growing to do, we'll be setting goals and dreaming into the stories you might tell and ideas you might craft in the months to come. In this retreat, you'll have time to write and connect with a beautiful community of myth-minded folks who are on the quest to use these ancient stories to make sense of our modern world. Harvest, an online Lughnasa retreat for writers and creatives, is open to everyone. Or it could be your introduction to our global writing community, the Writer's Knot. When you enroll in a 5-month membership in the Writer's Knot, from August through December of 2024, you can attend the Lughnasa Writing Retreat for free. Also, one last announcement before we get into the story. If you've been wishing you could join the Writer's Knot in the past, but have never been able to make the time work, I wanted to make sure that you knew. In addition to our traditional noon Eastern on Wednesday gatherings, I'll be starting an additional group that will meet at 7 p.m. Eastern on Mondays. You can find all the details on my website, marisagoudy.com/events. Our last episode of KnotWork Storytelling was a bit of a departure, in that it was a solo episode and also an unscripted story. Well, this time, let's call it half a departure. Again, it's just me, Marisa, your host of KnotWork Storytelling. But this time, my story's a little better prepared, let's say. As is our way on the podcast, what I'm going to do today is let this story speak for itself. And then I'll be speaking a little bit about all the ways I feel that it matters for us right now. Tailtiu wasn't particularly heartbroken when Yoki, son of Eric, was killed. The violent slaughter of her people was devastating, but she wasn't necessarily sad to watch the old regime fall to make room for the new. She had been queen of the Fir Bolg, but to be first amongst women in a race named for the men of the Bolg wasn't really saying much. The Fir Bolg had recently returned to this island after a long time away. They were hardened by their years of exile and labor. They'd toiled in the hot weather of the south, enslaved to a people who thought them capable of little more than moving earth and toting clay. They had managed to turn barren rock into fertile fields, but their own labors never benefited their own tribe. Even when they were freed from their chains and made their way back to the land that we now know as Ireland, life was struggle and toil. They had lost the magic of music and poetry after all those years in the unrelenting Grecian sun. And so, Tailtiu was queen, but she was too busy being of service to worry about the royal tea service. For the Fir Bolg, marriage was for children, and children were for labor, and labor was for survival, and survival was all they understood. Tailtiu prided herself on knowing better than speaking of foolish things like love or desire. She would never let on that she knew there was more to this life than the next meal. Once upon a time, when she was younger and bolder and less weathered by time and dismissal, she had tried to speak to her people of such things, but she had long since given up. Until the dream. She couldn't keep the dream of 1,000 black birds filling the sky to herself. She awoke with a terrible, stony certainty in her belly. A new fleet of warriors was speeding toward their shores. Her husband Yoki dismissed her, as she had expected. He returned to the endless quarrels with his men about the lack of fish in the river and what the latest hunting expedition had produced. Tailtiu nursed her terror in silence as she joined the rest of the women, harvesting roots and gathering mushrooms and acorns from the great oak grove. And then they all smelled the smoke. The horde of marauding heroes arrived in great clouds of white and gray and black. It seemed as if they blew in on magic mists, but it was only that the new arrivals had burned their boats when they landed upon the shore. These were the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and they were utterly certain they would not need those boats again. They were here to conquer and bring their new breed of magic to this land cradled in the northern seas. The Fir Bolg put up a mighty resistance, but nearly all died upon that battlefield. Tailtiu and her women were safe. They hid in the mighty oak groves, nestled beneath the moss that blanketed the fallen trees that still served the sacred purpose in this mighty forest. In the negotiations following the 4-day battle, the Fir Bolg were given the land of Connacht, the western province with its gorgeous, lonesome shores. Over time, as the Tuatha Dé grew more established on this land, weaving their songs into the streams and letting the soft light of a spring morning shape their bardic dreams, a peace grew between them and those they'd pushed to the distant west. The Tuatha Dé were a confident lot, but they wanted to do all that they could to make certain they would ever reign over these forests and mountains and rivers. They sent their best and brightest, a deeply talented boy named Lugh, to foster with the Fir Bolg people. Tailtiu, ever attentive, ever steadfast, ever kind, was the clear choice to serve as the boy's foster mother. Their bond was a powerful one and promised to last through this lifetime and beyond. When Lugh was grown and left his fosterage in Connacht to enter full-time hero work with the family of his birth, Tailtiu was bereft. He'd promised to return, and she trusted that he would when he could, but it was cold comfort on her clouded days. She'd grown accustomed to that beautiful, brash, young male energy beside her hearth. This was a young man who could teach her about his goddess Danu, and who helped her remember the beautiful, brash young girl she had tried to be once upon a time. He respected her, his foster mother, as a woman and as a mother in a way that was utterly unknown in her clan. Through this boy, who she had not birthed with her body, she was born anew. Grateful did not begin to describe how she felt. A new sense of power had awoken within her. But these huddled villages, the last of the Fir Bolg, these people were not interested in her new ideas, her new songs, or her new bright expression. And so, after she had spent too many lonely nights wondering what her bright, shining boy was doing in the world, she decided to find him. She headed eastward to the heart of Ireland and then beyond. She made her way through endless forests until she reached a gentle river that reflected the sun and the sky. She wanted to see more sky in this place. She had a vision. Since she could not find Lugh, perhaps he could find her. Alone in the dense wood, sustained only by river water, as she gave herself no time to forage for food, Tailtiu set to work. She had always found it strange that her people had been so very skilled at creating fertile soil when they had been enslaved by the Greeks, but only remembered the relentless toil when they returned to their homeland. Had they not been paying attention to what their captors did with that land once it was reclaimed from the bare granite and cloaked in rich clay? They planted crops. They set seeds in the soil and practiced patience as the sprouts reached towards the sun and became wheat and barley. But the Fir Bolg were too busy nursing their resentments and using bones to pick meat from their teeth to notice. But Tailtiu, she paid attention. She understood this miracle of agriculture. To fill a field with potential life, offer it enough care and time, and harvest it before the cold and the dark set in, and then trust the bellies of the people could be full all winter? Miraculous. Or so it seemed. Tailtiu was an innovator. Rather than naked stone, she had a profusion of wooded life before her. Fortunately, she knew that it was a woman's birthright, not just to create and grow, but also to destroy and release. She would strip away these trees and brambles and reveal the waiting earth beneath. She would bring new life and a new way of being through this act of conscious destruction. And so, she got to work. Day and night, only sleeping when she stumbled and could not stand. She had no tools but her own hands, her devotion to her golden boy, and her desire to offer the new people of this land and their goddess an enduring way to show her gratitude. After a full season of labor, great clear plains flanked the sides of this meandering dark river. She was pleased, but she was depleted, and beyond depleted. She lay down for a rest. This time she would allow herself more sleep, real sleep. But she never rose again. In the meantime, Lugh had heard of the mighty woman who single-handedly transformed the forest beside the meandering Blackwater River. He wanted to know who such a being might be, and he set out as soon as his heroic schedule would allow. On the riverbank, he saw a crumpled form. By the long hair and the slim ankles, he knew she was female, but she was so very small. Only when he stretched his own radiant hand to touch her shoulder and turn her toward him did Lugh realize it was his own beloved Tailtiu. She had been a holy mountain to him in life. How did she have such a narrow face, such fragile wrists, such slim hips? He wept and cried out, and his voice was swallowed by the vast new expanses that surrounded him. Now Lugh was as wise as the mother he mourned, and he understood what Tailtiu had been imagining when she set herself to this impossible task. He knew she had sacrificed herself so that his people, and all of the people of this land, could find a new way of living on and with the earth herself. And he cursed Tailtiu's selfless, delusional dedication, even as he marveled at Tailtiu's love and power. How could she believe that these green fields were more important than she was, there by her hearth, all full of curiosity and love? But calculating the cost after all had been given and all had changed utterly, was the preoccupation of a fool. He looked up from her lifeless body, and a vision of his own came to him. It was too late in the summer to plant new crops, but this would be the perfect place for a great gathering. And so he called all of the Tuatha Dé and all of those who were brave enough amongst the Fir Bolg to come for a great festival, games and feasting, all in honor of the remarkable woman who had fostered him and who left her mark forever upon their land and culture. A great bower was created not far from that bend in the river where Lugh had found Tailtiu. The Fir Bolg who attended still remembered how to move earth to create a burial mound that would last millennia. And so, Tailtiu was remembered and mourned and celebrated that day, as she would have been by every person who had learned to sow seeds and harvest crops and take the title of farmer. Shanae, that's my story for today. And there is so much in this one. I just want to cover a couple of the ideas today because I'm actually working with this story very closely as part of an event that I'm leading on August 1st, on Lughnasa, on the festival that Lugh created in honor of his foster mother. I'll talk about that again in a couple of minutes and invite you to join me there. But I want to cover some of the ideas we won't be talking about in our event, because the event is very much going to be about reflecting on our own creativity, on our own desire for what we might think of as over-productivity in order to feed the constantly hungry content beasts. But this story has so many facets. I wanted to devote an episode of the podcast to really thinking about them. So one of the first ideas I want to just touch on is the myth of the selfless mother. I question it deeply. I reject it, absolutely. And yet, it's a reality in our world. So why is that? Why is it that we continue to perpetuate these ways in which the mother is of service at the cost of her own body, soul, mind, passion? In this story, it was Tailtiu's gratitude for the change that was wrought. It was also perhaps her nostalgia for the girl she was not able to be, but the energy that was embodied in that new, brilliant foster son of hers. And I think that there are second chances in life. I do think that as our children age, whether they're becoming teens and preteens, whether it's that they're moving out of the house, women have this ability to rediscover powers within them. But it may feel like we wait too long or that we've missed too much powerful and important time when constantly in service to other people. What would it be like to both celebrate what motherhood is, but also decouple it from that constant obsession with selfless giving? Wouldn't that change so much in the lives of women, in the lives of families, in the lives of children? And couldn't we trust ourselves? Couldn't we trust women and mothers to do it well? Let's move on to another element of this story that fascinates me. And that's the way that the birth of the son leads to the initiation of the mother. Now, of course, this is something that recurs in myth across all different traditions. We know it best, perhaps, from the Christian tradition, of course. This story, though Lugh is not actually her biological son, calls that in too. And this story layers in that idea of the lover too, especially because Tailtiu gets to know Lugh as an emerging adult. Because though they are not physical lovers, he becomes the mirror that reflects her own beauty and love and potential and power right back to her. Motherhood, even later in life, was a deeply powerful initiation for Tailtiu. And her son was more than a son. He was a god who could bring the goddess out in her. And for what it's worth, we tend to name Tailtiu as a goddess, but I'm not sure that's strictly correct if we know that she was a very mortal member of the Fir Bolg. And I guess it's up for some scholarly debate that I'm probably not ready to dive into as to whether all of the different beings who featured in the Irish Book of Invasions were in fact immortal or otherwise. But really, what I think is most interesting here is the way that it was her own great feat, her own great skill, her own deeply powerful relationship with Lugh that elevated her to this sort of divine status after her own death. And so I often wonder about how it is that goddesses and gods are made. What conveys divinity? In this case, it certainly seems as if it's Tailtiu's own devotion that makes that possible. And there's another idea I want to explore, because so often when I have come across this story, I think it ends up being compacted into, here's a way that the Irish learned the art and skills of agriculture. And, that really sounds like a wonderful moment of progress captured in one goddess story. And, we love to be able in our modern age to take a goddess down into the description of a paragraph or a tarot card and make her into something emblematic and wonderful and simple. We often think of agriculture as being the thing that brings us the wonderful, or otherwise, abundance that we enjoy today. But of course, it's important to remember that not everyone lives abundantly in this moment in time. Agriculture and that which accompanied it, the consolidation of power into governmental type entities, is so far from a clear-cut win for the collective future. Now, when I dare to take myself into the realm of considering whether or not agriculture was a net win or not for humanity, I'm really influenced by James C. Scott's Against the Grain, in which he questions the whole idea that the move from sedentary agricultural communities was really as wonderful as we have imagined it to be. Because we've been largely taught to buy into a mythology that's centered around the divine origins of grain. And as Scott says, the assumption that the sedentary itself is superior to and more attractive than mobile forms of subsistence is really questionable. And that's essentially saying, are farmers better than hunter-gatherers, right? And that we've sort of been taught that's part of human evolution, human development, that all of the wonders of today's moment, in which we have so much stuff and so much inequality and so much environmental degradation, is a result of everybody settling down and having, at least in the United States, that house and 2 cars and 2.5 children that is in every way the myth of the modern middle class. Because Scott's work questions the inevitability of the state. Because what if that hierarchical power over model was not the only way of organizing society? I don't really pretend to understand what that would look like, because I am very much a product of this particular American society with its government as it is and all the ways in which we make our society work. But what if there was a different way? What if we were able to have a different vision? Because both in this story, both Tailtiu and Lugh had visions that changed things, right? Tailtiu knew she couldn't find Lugh while out for her great walk in the wilds. If she created something, he would come. And he also had a vision of the way for me to celebrate my beloved foster mother is not necessarily by immediately giving over to planting, but first to have this fabulous celebration, which would, of course, be repeated over and over across the years, all the way up into the 17th and maybe even the 18th century, in what's now known as Tailtown in Ireland. Now, I want to loop back too. As I mentioned before, there's this idea that grain has a divine origin, right? That was the real turning point, almost as powerful as humanity discovering fire. But in a way, this story gives us Ireland's version of the divine grain story. And it's made possible by a sacrificial woman-made goddess who cleared the fields so that the seeds could be planted. But what happens if we unhook ourselves from the old way of seeing that would declare that Tailtiu was a sort of holy martyr for the advent of beautiful civilization? What if we questioned the results, even though we're living them right now? And what if instead we saw Tailtiu as a human who gave too much and who, though motivated by love, may have sacrificed herself for a bad deal? What if we let ourselves reckon with the ways that civilization and the creation of the state, and by extension, the creation of empire and colonialism and everything that comes with that, all of the oppression, makes Tailtiu's story even more tragic? A part of me always hesitates to go there with some of these stories because it's then that essentially I can hear certain folks saying to me things like, well, what do you want to do? Question everything? And yes, I do. That's part of the reason why we study myth, to look back to say, hey, if the origins of our way of being go back this many thousands of years, what if Tailtiu had made a different decision? What if she had brought those women with her and they had worked with her to clear those fields? What if she had survived? Or what if she had bumped into Lugh along the way and didn't decide that what she needed to do was give everything in order to transform the society in the way that the Greeks did? Because, of course, with having the Greeks in this story, that is in many ways one of the greatest civilizations we've ever known, depending on how you want to look at it. And she chose to emulate that. She chose to use her power to bring that reality to her land. And again, that's a story of colonialism. That's a story of transporting one group's ways of life to another land until, look, everywhere looks so much the same. And we start to believe these are merely the stories of humanity and it was all inevitable. But what if it wasn't? I don't know. This is the story that I'm still living with and playing with. And as I said, at the beginning of my opportunity to play with and dream with and wonder with this story with you, I am really looking at this tale from lots of different angles. And on August 1st, a group of writers and creatives from around the world are going to be coming together to do some myth work of the Tailtiu story with me. And we're going to see what it reveals about our own relationship with creativity and effort and service and work and overwork. So in our time together, we're going to ask this story to help us hold space and expand our perspectives as we think about things like, well, what we've been working on and what we've accomplished over the last season, over the last year, or whatever period's most important to you. And we're going to look really honestly at what we've accomplished, but also what we've not accomplished as the result of the effort we've put forth. It's also an opportunity to celebrate all that work and effort because, of course, Lughnasa is a time of great celebration. We'll be talking about how we're serving and sharing our work with others. We'll look at how we're allotting our energy, how we're nurturing ourselves, and we'll also be looking at all the ways we destroy ourselves with this endless quest for productivity. So Harvest, the Lughnasa Writers Retreat, is happening online on August 1st from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll gather to receive this story. I'll be telling it in a slightly different way on the call, I suspect, as I keep working with these themes and listening to Tailtiu's whispers over the next week or so. And then we'll spend the balance of our time writing and discussing what this story inspires in us when it comes to our creative lives. Everything from the role of effort to the role of love to the role of service. We'll explore work and overwork and how the systems we now find ourselves in, the late capitalism that demands we constantly feed the digital beast with more and more art and more effort and more mere content. And just so you know, this is really an entree into my Writer's Knot community, which begins its regular meetings the second week of August. You can certainly attend the retreat without joining the ongoing community. I would certainly love to have you with us for both. And as you often hear me mention at the beginning of every episode, the way to support this podcast is by supporting me on Substack. My newsletter over there is called Myth is Medicine. And if you join now as a paid subscriber, you're invited to come to the Lughnasa Writers Retreat for free. So check everything out on my website, marisagoudy.com. You can also head over to my Substack, Myth is Medicine, for more details. I would love to have you with us for this event. I'd love to hear what comes through for you with this story. I'd love it to be a catalyst for you to think about your own work and effort, and also how our work and effort works in our big, complicated world. I'm so grateful to you for being part of the KnotWork Storytelling community. By listening to these stories, by letting them touch you in some way, you are absolutely already a member of that community. Coming to the Lughnasa Writers Retreat, joining me over at Myth is Medicine, my Substack, is another way to take a step even closer to this work we're doing of myth working, of soul smithing, of really gathering together to talk about what really matters. Thanks so much. Thank you for tuning in to the KnotWork Storytelling Podcast. Please subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast platform, and do share this episode with other lovers of myth and story. By the way, everyone is a lover of myth and story, even if they've forgotten. Creating this show is a labor of love, and your support will help me continue to craft and share stories through this season and beyond. Please consider becoming a subscriber to my paid newsletter, Myth is Medicine. You'll find it on Substack, and that's where all my newest writing and occasional bonus podcasts can be found. You can learn more about my writing, my book, our online creative community, The Writer's Knot, as well as how to work with me as a writing coach over at marisagoudy.com. Gratefully, I live, write, work, and record this podcast on the ancestral lands of the Munsee Lenape tribe, whose name means original people.